Well, we are going to turn to John 10, 11 through 21 this morning as we continue our series, our I Am series through John's Gospel. And you'll know that we've already looked pretty closely at three of these I Ams. We have already heard a little about I am the bread of life, and then I am the light of the world, and then last week we talked about I am the gate. This morning we're going to hear Jesus declare, I am the good shepherd. I'm the good shepherd. Now, just as I explained last week, we need to pay attention to the context. We need to know exactly kind of the audience and the scene with which Jesus is speaking into. And this Sunday, like last Sunday, we're actually in the same story. We haven't left. 2 weeks ago, we began this story about a man who was born blind and is healed by Jesus. His life is restored. And then the religious community throws him out of the church and rejects him. And so this crowd is gathered. There are religious leaders, there's this man that has been healed, there is this larger family and neighborhood and community, and then a number of very curious folks. They're all drawn in, and Jesus has declared three different I Ams into this same context. He said, I am the light of the world, while he was standing in the temple in the Feast of the Tabernacles. And then again to his disciples, and again to that blind man. And then to the religious leaders that rejected this poor man, he said, I am the gate, providing a warning. And then today, he turns to the larger crowd, to those who are curious, who've had their interest piqued, who have seen something miraculous happen and don't understand what's going on. And Jesus is going to say, I am the good shepherd. So let's turn to God's word this morning. Hear the word of the Lord from John 10, 11 through 21. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, who is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. The hired hand runs away because a hired hand does not care for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice, so there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it back up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have the power to lay it down, and I have the power to take it up again. I've received this command from my Father. Again, the Jews were divided because of these words. Many of them were saying, he has a demon. He's out of his mind. Why listen to him? And others were saying, these are not the words of one who has a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay, so I want to begin with a short lesson on sheep. I think it's important that we understand what we're talking about here. And so sheep are often known to be unintelligent animals, right? But that's actually not really fair. Sheep can be quite bright, actually. Sheep can retain memory. Sheep recognize the sound of their shepherd. Sheep can recognize the faces of the sheep around them, and they actually have a wide emotional range. It's true. So I think they're unfairly considered to be stupid or dumb animals. But they are flock animals. They need to be around other sheep to be okay. They truly cannot just be on their own. You will not just see one sheep off by themselves, and that's because they are intended to live in the flock, in the herd. And I think this is what maybe gets them a bad rap. Sheep are also known to wander. They get distracted pretty easily. They're directionally challenged. You'll find them lost easily and often. This is true about sheep. And they're fearful animals. They're pretty skittish. They've been known, if they're scared enough, they will run right off a cliff. which is pretty sad. And so this gets them into a lot of trouble. They find themselves stuck in bushes, trapped in ravines, in need of some rescue, frequently. But here's my favorite thing about sheep. They can hear better than most any other animal. They have an innate ability to know the distinct call and voice of their shepherd. They hear better than many other animals. Now, maybe it feels a little condescending to imagine that God constantly refers to us as sheep, but I think it's a pretty fair metaphor, actually. I do. I mean, of course, human beings we're incredibly complex. We're developed, absolutely, I understand that. But there are still some really striking similarities that I think make the metaphor true. They reinforce the image. And so here's a few things that I think correlate pretty well for you and for me. First, we are wonderful at following, aren't we? We're followers. We follow our partner, our families. We follow our culture. We follow celebrities and athletes. I mean, right now we follow Instagram feeds and Twitter. We follow. It's what we do. It's what we do. And there's nothing wrong with that. The reason we are followers is because we're designed, we were made and intended and created to live in community. We are flock animals too. You are a flock animal. You belong in a herd. And that's because God has created us and designed us with this need to be told from someone outside ourselves that we matter, that we belong, that we're safe, that we're loved. It's true. There's a powerful South African Zulu word that I love. It's like one of the most important concepts for me about what it means to exist in community, exist in the family. And it's this word Ubuntu. You guys ever heard that? Ubuntu. It's a fun one. It rolls right off the tongue. Ubuntu means I am because we are. And it's taken from a larger Zulu phrase that's translated this way. It says, a person is a person through other people. So Ubuntu, I am because we are. And I think in our modern West, we've really lost this concept of what it means to exist in a family and in a community. I mean, we think we're like an island. We think like our rugged individualism is the most true thing about us. But it's just not. It's just not. We're dependent on one another in a way that I think we have lost in an attempt to be independent, to be on our own. And though I can't really go into this in very much detail today, I can tell you that every single research study done on human development and across the social scientists can prove quite effectively that we cannot exist without other people. You can't. You cannot exist without other people. You were not made to exist without others. To be human is to be connected in community. To exist, to thrive, to nourish one another in the family. I can't know who I am apart from others. I can't. Ubuntu, I am because we are. Just like sheep, we're flock animals. Another reason I think the metaphor works between sheep and humanity is we too get very hurt and very lost very easily. I know I am not the only one that is also directionally challenged. We wander off, don't we? We get trapped pretty easily in the ravines of our lives. We need someone to yank us out frequently. And so, I don't know, I think sheep is a pretty fair metaphor for us. I do. And this metaphor, I think that's the reason it's used throughout the biblical example. The sheep-shepherd image is the most common analogy for the divine human image. It is. We are sheep. And so you might be familiar with Psalm 23, right? We just sang it in hymn version. The Lord is my shepherd. Psalm 95 and 103 both say, we are the sheep of his pasture. And then flip to the prophets, folks like Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel. They all employ the same metaphor. Sheep and shepherd, flocks. When you flip to the New Testament, Jesus picks it up immediately. And so you're probably familiar with Jesus' famous parable of the lost sheep, when he leaves the 99 to go find the one. Now, I reminded us last week, and I want to remind us again, that this is not used in a condescending manner. Jesus is not upset that we're sheep. In fact, he turns in Matthew 9:36 and says, when he saw the crowds, Jesus had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And so now, as much of this metaphor, it is about us. It's about what it means to be a human being, connected to one another. It is also a metaphor about our shepherd. And so we are not to understand ourselves just as sheep in a flock. We are to understand ourselves in relation to our shepherd, to our good shepherd. And so our text is going to show us what God is like. Our text is going to show us a good shepherd, and this is held in comparison to all the other shepherds. All the other shepherds. And so I want to look a little bit closer at this. Jesus basically says to this crowd of people, he says, I'm here now. And there's been a lot of other shepherds, but I'm good. I'm the good shepherd. I do not abandon you and leave you when things get hard. In fact, I'm the kind of shepherd that lays down my life for the sheep and lay down my own life to make sure my sheep are safe and are brought to life and life flourishing. And so I think there's 4 things that I kind of want to pull out of our text to highlight for us as we conceptualize and understand what Jesus means when he says, I am the good shepherd, okay? And so the first thing is that the good shepherd will just never leave you. Never. The good shepherd has not left you and will not leave you. Jesus says that the good shepherd does not abandon the sheep, even when things get dangerous, even when things are hard. And so I want you to hear this morning, God has not left you. No matter what your feelings say, we go through things in life that can leave us wondering where God is. We spoke those words in our prayer of confession this morning. God, where are you? God, why aren't you doing anything about this? But the truth of this text is that we serve a God that has not and will not abandon us. God has not left you. And even more, God is the kind of shepherd that when we are lost, when we are wandering, when we are hurting, God seeks us out. God is looking for you if you are lost today. He wants to lead us to life and life flourishing. And so that's the first thing. The good shepherd will not leave you. The second thing is this good shepherd knows you. Knows you. Jesus said he knows the sheep and he calls them by name, and that the sheep will recognize his voice. I think this is really important. It makes me think of this moment after the resurrection. Maybe you guys remember the story. Mary goes to the tomb. Jesus has just been murdered. Just a couple days before this, she's distraught with grief, and she's preparing to offer spices and treat his body. And she thinks that there's this guy here that's a gardener who's disrupting her moment of grief. And it's Jesus, resurrected. But she doesn't recognize him because she's just absorbed by the pain of everything that's happened to her. And what happens? Jesus calls her name. He says, Mary. And immediately she recognizes the Lord. Immediately she knows it's Jesus. Jesus knows your name. He knows your name. And even more, he promises that when he calls your name, you will recognize his voice. So God knows you. The third thing is the good shepherd, Jesus says, have other sheep. There's other sheep in this flock. I want us to notice this. Jesus says he has other sheep that in God's kingdom there's one flock and one shepherd. Now, in John's context, when Jesus says this, he's talking about the Gentiles. He says, I have other sheep that are not yet in this fold, but I'm calling their name, and there's one flock and one shepherd. And the Gentiles were just anyone that wasn't Jewish. And so he basically says, sure, they might not share your heritage, they might not have the same color skin, they might not speak the same language, but they are part of the flock too. They are part of the flock too. And so it makes me wonder, who are the Gentiles in our time? Think about that. Think about your place of employment. Maybe your own family. Think about our church community here. Who are the Gentiles? Who are the people that are not yet part of the fold that Jesus is calling to? I think it's important that we note this, especially today, on World Communion Sunday, on a day when we intentionally mark the wonderful diversity of God's beautiful, beloved community of faith across the whole world. Our world is big, and God calls everyone. All tribes, all tongues, all people, one flock. And then the last thing I just want to draw our attention to is that the Good Shepherd lays down his life for us, the sheep. He lays down his life for the sheep. Now, keep in mind, at this time, sheep were bred for one reason, really. Either for food or to be sheared, sometimes for sacrifice. And so the very best sheep were grown to be killed. So when Jesus says, I'm the Good Shepherd, and in fact, I lay my life down for my sheep, people would have been like, excuse me? That doesn't make any sense. That does not compute. No, sheep, they're just nothing. And Jesus says, no, they're not nothing. I'll die for them. I'll die for them. And this is exactly what we celebrate at the Lord's table today. That our Good Shepherd, his body was broken and his blood was poured out. For us. For the sheep. And not only does our God have the power to lay his life down, our God has the power to bring his life back up through the power of the resurrection. Now, I know that life often feels like a dangerous wilderness for us that are easily scared, easily distractible sheep. We wander around in the wilderness and the terrain gets pretty rocky. It's dark out there. Maybe it seems like there's coyotes howling way too close. And we look around and we wonder, are we really all in this alone? But even on those hard days, and maybe especially on those hard days when we feel stuck in the wilderness, I want to remind us of our one job as sheep. Our one job is to just stay close to our shepherd. That's it. Our one job is just to stay close to Jesus Christ and learn to recognize his voice. It really is that simple. In a commentary I was reading this week as I was studying for this sermon, I read about this woman who, in the middle of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, her husband was unfortunately killed. And it threw her and their young son into poverty. And all she had as a way of earning a living was this really tiny flock of sheep, about 20 sheep. And so as the conflict wore on, her sheep ended up being confiscated by the military. And so as any good mama bear would do, she marched right into those government offices and said, you're gonna have the blood of me and my boy on your hands if you don't give me my sheep back. I need my 20 sheep, they're all I have. And the government said, fine, go ahead. You can go look for your sheep. But they laughed at her because they said, how are you going to recognize your 20 sheep among hundreds and hundreds of sheep? All these sheep that are part of our stables. And she said, but just let me try. And they said, fine, try. We'll give you a few minutes. And so she and her son walked into this flock filled with hundreds of sheep, and her little boy started playing a little song on a reed flute over and over and over, this simple little tune. And within just a couple seconds, 20 sheep's heads perked up and looked around. And they just turned and kept playing that note on that little reed flute and walked home, and all 20 of her sheep walked right out. There is something distinctive about the call of our Good Shepherd. It sounds like love. When Jesus Christ calls your name, it sounds like love, and you will recognize it. You will recognize it. Your hearts and your heads will perk up as you recognize Jesus Christ calling you to life. And that's what I want you to hold on to this week. Martin Luther has this great line talking about this text, and he says this. He says, "The sheep is often assumed to be an unintelligent animal, but nevertheless, it has this one trait above all other animals, that it soon learns to hear its shepherd's voice, and it will follow no one but its shepherd. It always knows enough to keep close to its shepherd and to look to him for help. And this is the most intelligent instinct of all." You know, sheep might not know much, but they recognize the voice of their good shepherd. And that is the best, isn't it? That's the only thing we need to do. That is the most intelligent instinct of all. And so remember this week, you have a good shepherd that calls your name, that knows where you are. If you are lost or hurting or afraid or frightened or trapped in the ravines of life, your good shepherd is searching for you and calling you by name. And his voice sounds like love. Now, I do think that this text it can be directly confrontational to some of our narratives that we hold on to about God. Like I said last week, I think a lot of the world walks through this life thinking that God is mad at them. If that's true for you, if you worry that God is mad at you or against you, I want you to sit with this image this week. I want you to turn to a good shepherd that knows your name. And let that confront whatever narrative you have about God. Because your God says that he is a good shepherd, and he loves you, and he knows you, and he wants to lead you to life. I'm going to close by reading one of my favorite prayers, Thomas Merton, which reflects, real honestly, how easy it is for us to wander and get lost, and how faithful our good shepherd is to lead us by the right road anyway. So please pray with me. Lord God, I have no idea where I'm going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end. Nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I am following your will does not mean that I'm actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope that I have that desire in all I am doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. Therefore, I will trust you always, though I may seem lost and in the shadow of death. I will not fear, for you are ever with me and will never leave me to face my perils alone. Amen.